All right, I can go kick it off with a quick intro on Odyssey, and then we can hand it over to who you're all here to see, the panelists. But thank you everybody for showing up to Odyssey's Breaking into Venture Capital panel. We have an awesome host of people here to help you out and to get connected with and share a little bit about their perspectives. Most of you are Odyssey members. For those who aren't, we're an open, totally free community of underrepresented students getting connected with professionals across different industries. So that's undergrad and grad students are welcome. You can get mentoring, career discovery conversations. You can practice interviews, you go over your resume, whatever you want to do with the professionals or whatever they're willing to do. You can just, it's easy as going on there, clicking to book your half-hour office hour session with them. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ping me afterwards. And without further ado, I will hand it off to our host, Ed Zimmerman. Thank you very much, Ed, for hosting and moderating today's panel.
Thanks so much. Really happy to be here with all of you. And it's an important conversation. I'll give you a quick background on me and then pass it over to the panelists so that they can give you a little bit of background and context, and hopefully we'll fall into conversation and then get some Q&A. And thank you for the questions that you've sent in advance. So I grew up in Brooklyn, and after a bunch of school for which I borrowed a whole bunch of money, I went to work at Lowenstein Sandler in the early 1990s when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. And I started teaching, so that's a law firm. I'm in New York. I started teaching internet law and startup law in the mid to late 90s at Rutgers Law School in Newark. Started our tech group at Lowenstein and remained the longest tenured startup and venture capital lawyer in New York. And I started angel investing over time and investing in venture funds. And I've been teaching venture capital in the MBA program at Columbia for the last 17 years or so, and have started a couple of different things, one of which is a fund called First Close Partners, with which I run with some friends, where we invest in venture funds that are owned and operated by underrepresented VCs. And that includes funds run by several of the folks on today's panel. So with that as a little bit of my background, maybe Kimmy, you can go first and give a little bit of where you're from and what you do and how you got there.
Great, thank you, Ed. Yeah, so Kimmy Paluch. I was born and raised in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. I came to the States for the last 2 years of high school and stayed. So I did computer science undergrad at Dartmouth, and I avoided all of the consulting, iBanking, and all of the recruiting that happened after graduation, and moved to the Bay Area. I kind of charted a non-traditional path in tech, had issues getting hired as an engineer, so went out on my own and started consulting, and then worked with a web shop as a product manager. So I was leading engineering teams by the age of 23, and decided I could do this on my own. So spun out my own firm a year after working for that company, and built that over time. So about 12 years or so in the Bay Area. I took a break to go back for an MBA at MIT. And then after MIT, I went back into consulting with a break in between. I was looking for more meaning in my work. So I started working in ed tech. I worked at Leapfrog and ran their white space innovation, and then charted my way into VC really on purpose. I was kind of frustrated by what was getting investment in the Bay Area. So I was working for a lot of startups and corporations, and I wanted to see more diversity, not just in the people, but in the innovations that were being created. I wanted to see more that were serving for the 99%, or for people that looked like me or that I grew up with. And so I purposefully started working in venture because I knew that money and where the money goes will then address what innovations get created. And so I started with a fund. It was actually connected with my undergrad alumni group. and I got a crash course. And typical with my MO, I did that for a little bit and then said, hey, I think I can do this on my own. Purposefully wanting again to create a new paradigm for how do you actually tap into what everybody recognizes as the biggest opportunity that's been overlooked for decades, which is diversity. And so I started my own fund back in 2018, did a first fund on my own. We were the sole LPs, myself and my partner, and now are investing out of our second fund. I had some lessons learned, and we'll talk about things that I learned along the way, but certainly kind of just jumped in. I will hand the mic over to Vinay.
But before you do that, though,
Oh.
can you just give us one thought on what it was that inspired Utah Business to name you their 2020 Woman of the Year?
I don't know, we should ask them. No. So when I charted on this path, like I said, I was looking for diversity. And one of the biggest things that I recognize is obviously capital, venture capital predominantly goes to three markets, the Bay Area, New York, and Boston, with the lion's share going to the Bay Area. So one of the things I wanted to see was greater geographic diversity. So when we charted on this path, we actually chose Utah to be our base, sold everything in the Bay Area and moved to Salt Lake City area. I've been doing a lot of work here beyond the fund for diversity and enablement and advancement of women. And I think it's a lot of the work that I'm doing outside of the fund. So not just investing in more women and founders of color, including in Utah, but across rising tech hubs across the US. But I've started a grant program for Black female founded businesses and works with a lot of organizations that are trying to advance more representation, particularly in our tech industry, which is booming. All right, with that, I'll hand the mic over. Thanks for inviting me, Ed.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting. And Brian, thanks again for hosting us, and Ed for moderating. My name is Vinay. I am an investor at TwoSigma Ventures, based in San Francisco. My career path has been similarly windy, though not quite as windy. I've spent most of my career now as a venture capital investor. My background before becoming a VC is fairly technical by training. So I went to college to study math and computer science and thought I would go on to do a PhD and have an academic career. And when I was in college, I sort of randomly discovered entrepreneurship. Me and a friend tried to start a company. We were basically trying to build the equivalent of Superhuman, if you guys are familiar with the email client. It was a total failure. It didn't work at all, but I caught the entrepreneurship bug, and I realized how magical entrepreneurship can be if you're taking innovations and you're exposing them to the world. And if you're successful, you can have a lot of impact at scale in a way that you really can't in a lot of other professions. And so I was very inspired by that. And through that process of trying to start a company, I learned about venture capital and met a bunch of investors, and was actually really lucky to land a gig in venture capital right out of college. So originally started my career at a firm called Bessemer Venture Partners, based in New York. Spent several years there focused on mostly early stage B2B software investing. And then I joined TwoSigma a couple of years ago to help us start our West Coast practice. And continue to spend a lot of time on early stage, mostly seed through Series B, B2B software investing. We're investing out of a $300 million fund, and we're part of a broader $60 billion quantitative hedge fund. I spend a ton of my time focused on D&I efforts. When I was at Bessemer, I started a program called the Bessemer Fellowship, which is a program that's pairing underrepresented college students with our portfolio companies for internship programs, and continue to spend a lot of time focused on talent development in that realm. And so, really excited to be here to answer your questions. And with that, I'll pass it on to Fatima.
Oh, one sec, just before you do, you also have an enviable angel investment portfolio that includes ACV auctions and a bunch of companies that have had multi-billion-dollar exits or valuations. Just you want to give like the 30 seconds on what an angel investor is and how you got started in angel investing.
Sure. So I have to caveat by saying a lot of those were while I was at this firm called Bessemer, they let us co-invest with the firm in a lot of different deals. And so most of that I can't take credit for. It's all just being in the right place at the right time, which that's a lot of life, honestly. And so a lot of those really successful angel investments are through Bessemer. And then I've been doing a bunch of angel investing the past couple of years on my own, not quite as successfully, but as you guys will learn, this is one of those businesses that takes a very long time to figure out if you're any good. And I'm still very much on this path of figuring out if I'm any good. And so an angel investor basically, supports companies with small checks, and usually they're really early rounds, and tries to add value to those companies. And so, yeah, happy to chat more about that later on.
Cool. Okay, thanks. To whom were you passing?
To Fatima.
Okay, great. Really excited to be here and to speak with all of you today. I grew up in India. I, similar to most people here, will likely have a windy path into venture. I grew up in India, moved here way back in the day for my undergrad and grad school, did both of those at Yale, studied primarily healthcare, and did my master's in public health, so spent a lot of time in the policy space. I started off my career, unlike Kimmy being smart about not joining consulting. I did join consulting, although it was a great foundation for what ended up giving me the thinking capabilities, the analytical chops that was needed to be, somewhat good at my current state of affairs. But I was at Bain for about 3 years, ended up spending a ton of time in their healthcare practice and their private equity practice, and then looking at a couple of different industries across there. I took a sabbatical, actually, went back to India, was working in the impact space for a little bit, decided I absolutely loved it, but there was a lot of inefficiencies that existed in that world. And I wanted to learn how to actually help in building the kinds of companies and products and operations that would be required to circumvent some of that. So when I came back to the States, this was back in 2013 when Airbnb had its headquarters in San Francisco, but no real presence on the East Coast in New York. And I was tapped as one of 3 individuals to set up all of East Coast operations and start really figuring out what's the right kind of playbook to think about helping the company grow its presence and its market base in core markets within North America. And so think of it as, really a jack of all trades at that point in time to really make sure that, the business and the health of the market was scaling and growing well. So I ended up doing that for the first stint of that journey at Airbnb. I spent much of the last decade there, actually. And so then switched into looking at a lot of product and growth work that was specifically on the supply side of the marketplace. It was a wonderful journey, ended up learning a ton, had an amazing culture, an amazing set of teams that I was working with. And then eventually, I think what was really starting to itch was, how do we take all the things that we had learned in those many years and start to translate that across a bunch of different other opportunities, other companies, and would there be a way to be able to scale out those learnings? And so I decided to explore the world of venture and give it a try and see if it was going to be a space that was going to enable me to do so. And I, similar to how Vinay articulated it, fell in love with the concept of really thinking about how do you explore these different opportunities that can pull us into a world that is better than what we're in today. And so that's, what I really got excited about. And the questions of what if and what could and what should are what keep me really excited every day about this, world that we have the pleasure of working in, and very excited to talk to all of you about it.
And you have some amazing stuff on your bio that is in the impact space, including both research and kind of hands-on work in HIV/AIDS, and also work in human trafficking, not actually trafficking, but in preventing and studying trafficking with a Nobel laureate. How do you find yourself working on trafficking research with a Nobel laureate? How does that happen?
Yeah, he wasn't one when I started working with him. And so it sort of is part of the path of the course, being in the right place at the right time. I went back to India and I was really sort of focused on figuring out ways and solutions to be able to increase financial inclusion, financial viability in pockets that haven't had that historically. I sort of stumbled upon a company, which was his company, that was a nonprofit working at improving some of the education and employment generation in rural parts of India. And so they focused quite specifically on children and particularly towards forced labor trafficking for children. And they were trying to find ways of retroactively preventing that. My work that I was doing with them for about a year was essentially to try and figure out how can you proactively prevent that. And so that was essentially where we started leaning into more specifically thinking about financial viability for families. And so a lot of the work that actually came out from that year was essentially finding the different pockets of both operational activities as well as policy mitigations that could assist in trying to nip the problem in the bud, which would actually be more from the perspective of if you have enough available capital to feed a family of 5, you're not going to feel the pressure of sending any of the kids to go anywhere in order to, find livelihood. And so we ended up working on that paper and that research. It was implemented and used by actually quite a few organizations, which we were really grateful for. But the Nobel laureate, Kailash Satyarthi, he's been working in the space for 35 years, 40 years at this point. He's a very dedicated man to the cause. And so 2 years later, I got a call when I was back in New York at 3 a.m. saying, check out the news right now. And I had no idea why they were yelling at me at 3 a.m. And I went and I looked at it and I saw that he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize, which was pretty phenomenal.
Amazing. All right. Tough to follow, but to whom would you like to pass?
I'm going to pass this on to Sean.
Yeah, the one person I did not want to follow. Fatima has a reputation that precedes her. For 3 years, I was being told that I needed to meet her, and I was being told we have a mutual, an advisor to me and a partner to her who said that he just follows her lead, and that's how he's found success investing. And so I was happy to meet her. Was it last summer that we finally met in person? And also learn a bit about you right now. I'm Sean Mendy. I'm Concrete Rose Capital. Most of my career has been in impact, and that's what brought me to venture. So first, I went to college to play soccer, didn't know what I was doing afterwards, but I grew up in Silicon Valley and had been fascinated with what access to financial and social capital did for folks in our community. So I watched, the families or the children that came from families that were building that Intel, Cisco, HP generation of technology companies that probably nobody on this call, really realizes that at one point we're the biggest companies. I saw what happened for those families, those kids, the trajectory that they were on. Then I watched the families that were in Silicon Valley that didn't have access to that wealth in that way, and I saw just a lot of talent not reach its potential. And so I first, as an operator, started a company with the goal of getting underrepresented talent into Fortune 500 companies. Ended up winding that down and joining a startup called Causes, which was the first app on Facebook back when Facebook had apps. And again, nobody probably uses Facebook, and second, probably nobody knows that they used to allow apps, but had 200 million users, and the idea was scaled social impact, help folks raise money for nonprofits, recruit volunteers, start petitions, sign pledges. While I was doing that, I started volunteering in East Palo Alto, which many folks, unless they're intimately familiar with the Bay Area, don't know exists, but it's a small community of color that is east of Palo Alto, which is what most folks do know about in the Bay Area. I was volunteering with the goal of mentoring a handful of Black middle schoolers and helping them make the right decisions, gain access to the right opportunities, kind of go in the path that I went, as opposed to some of the folks I grew up with who didn't have the right guidance and ended up in worse situations despite being far more talented than me. And somehow I ended up running the program that I was volunteering at and running a Boys and Girls Clubs organization in the heart of Silicon Valley. I ran it like a startup, and that attracted a lot of interesting people to become supporters. And so I found myself working with the CEOs of companies like Google and LinkedIn and and investors from places like Andreessen Horowitz and Acrew Capital, and with building these really interesting relationships. And I grew frustrated about 5 years ago with the fact that every year I would get a new group of families facing the same challenges, or worse versions of those same challenges as the year before. And I grew fascinated with what the actual root cause of the inequality I was seeing was. I mean, it brought me back to my roots growing up in Silicon Valley around wealth creation, who's had the opportunity to create it, not just in our contemporary time, but over the past several hundred years. I decided that it was really important to address the root cause of inequality, which is wealth, and the racial wealth gap, and explored getting involved in company building and investing. I was fortunate to have a few folks who really encouraged me and invested in me, both their time and their resources, to help me conceive of Concrete Rose, which invests across 3 focus areas. We mobilize underrepresented talent beyond just founders. So one, we are investing in Black and Latino led companies. Next, we're investing in companies being built to meet the needs of Black and Latino consumers. And then third, we invest in founders who may not be underrepresented themselves, but want to build diverse and inclusive companies. We partner with them, coach them on inclusivity, and then help them source and hire underrepresented talent. The last thing we do is we pledge half of our carry, half of the profits that we make as partners, to a foundation, which then funds organizations that are strengthening the leaky underrepresented talent pipeline. We were one of the first funds to do that back in 2018 when we launched. And it's actually turned into a really interesting way to source deals and build meaningful relationships with founders. I will pass to my friend from Acrew. Is it Acrew or Acrew? I say it a different way every time. And I also pronounce your name differently every time I say it. So I'm going to let you pronounce it, because I learned I was pronouncing it incorrectly.
Well, so before you pass to Maitree, and now I'm concerned that I've been mispronouncing it for 2 years, a year or two. I just want to ask you, because so I'm also the vice chair of a nonprofit called CPE, the Center for Policing Equity, which strives to use data to eliminate racism in law enforcement. And you've probably seen Professor Philip Atiba Goff on TV or the web or someplace talking about it. He's the founder of our organization. And so I know that you and I share an enthusiasm for working with folks who are justice involved. You have gone a step further and have been mentoring some inside out folks in or working with a college doing inside out education. Can you talk a little bit about that, Sean? And then we'll hear from Maitree.
Yeah, so one CPE was in one of the original concept papers for Concrete Rose, in that right now we're focused on this underrepresented talent pipeline with our foundation, but the broad vision is actually to create kind of the Robin Hood Foundation of racial inequality. So we want to fund any best-in-class organization that is addressing issues around race. So CPE was actually in the here's all the organizations that someday we will be funding. I am an advisor to Mount Tamalpais College, formerly known as the Prison University Project. It's the first independent accredited college within a U.S. prison. It's at San Quentin in Northern California. And while we are proud of the independent accreditation, is that there's a trend where colleges have partnered, usually community colleges have partnered with prisons to provide academic services within them, because there's funding that comes with that. And what often happens is they will then send a less than prepared, faculty member into the college, and the incarcerated folks receive substandard education. And our belief is that every mind is worth nourishing, and every mind, deserves access to a liberal arts education. And so for the past several years, we've worked to get that independent accreditation. We work with folks who have typically been incarcerated for several decades. It's amazing, the work that they do. It's far better than anything I did at Cornell or Stanford or USC. Went to way too much school. So very proud to be involved with that organization.
Thank you for doing that, and also for centering the intentionally created racism driven wealth gap in a conversation about venture capital. It's important. So with that, Maitree, and pronounce your first name for us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ed. Again, very tough to follow, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Maitree. I'm on the investment team at Acrew. We can also pronounce it Acrew. But I joined the Acrew team when we founded the fund about 2 years ago, and have been on the investment team since. I was born in India, lived in Kenya until I was 5, and then moved to the States with my family in search of better opportunities. I grew up in the Bay Area, surrounded, I guess, by the entrepreneurship world. My family, number of entrepreneurs in my family as well. And so going to college, I knew I wanted to do something in business and just follow the path of several of my family members around me. I went to UCLA. I could say, I think Fatima mentioned this, unfortunately or not, decided to go down the investment banking route right out of college, which in hindsight was definitely a really interesting and exciting foundational experience for me. But I always knew I wanted to be back in the Bay Area. I wanted to do something in the startup ecosystem. And so shortly after, was given the opportunity to join a firm that was helping large corporations launch and manage their venture programs. So during my time there, helped launch T-Mobile's venture program, which was, a really exciting time for a very traditional mobile carrier to be thinking about what's next within the tech ecosystem and how they can innovate and attract, kind of the evolving consumer demographic. And then shortly after that, was introduced to the team at Aspect at the time, where the co-founders of Acrew used to invest together before they started Acrew. Got to know the team very well, and when they decided to launch Acrew, reached out to see if I would be interested in joining the investment team. And so I think, like many things in this industry, was at the right place at the right time, and have been fortunate to have been part of this team for about 2 years now. And I think one of our core values is creating more accessibility for both underrepresented founders as well as underrepresented executives. So a good portion of LPs in our fund come from underrepresented backgrounds, and that's something that we believe very deeply in. And I think one of our core values as a team is diversity of perspective. And so I'm excited to share a little bit more about that today, and great to meet everyone.
And before we share more, you have black belt level skills. Can you talk about that?
That's true. Yeah. I did Taekwondo for about 10 years of my life. Haven't done it in about 5 or 6 years, but I started when I was in 2nd grade, got through a black belt, which is something that most people think is pretty unusual given my personality, but it was something that I did most of my life, which is something I'm excited about and want to get back into. Haven't done it in a while.
And so are your hands technically lethal weapons?
They can be, yes.
Okay. All right. So we will not mess with you. All right. So there were a bunch of questions, and a lot of them clustered around what hard or soft skills are you looking for when your respective firms are hiring folks? So if you want to give guidance on how these folks should be thinking about maybe packaging themselves or sharpening or deepening skills, hard or soft, what are some tips and what are things that they should be prioritizing?
I can go actually first, just because we're deeply and actively hiring. So I miss this part of it. I'm one of the co-founders and general partners at a newer venture firm called Mastry. And a lot of the folks on the panel, as well as Ed, are partners to us as we're building the firm. We're very excited about how we're trying to hopefully build something that's going to be interesting and new in the venture ecosystem. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we actually try to change some of the way that venture has historically operated in some ways, because I think early entrances into the world of venture can feel like a revolving door, and we're really trying to not do that. But when we think about our teams and who we're trying to, really add to the mix, it's people who have a high degree of curiosity, people who have a high degree of hunger, and people who have a very sort of, autonomous approach towards working. And the reason I say all of those things is because they're, I think, like the most critical things, and all other, parts of the required skill sets, from analytical capabilities and, asking the right questions, etc., I think are more foundational. And those are not rocket science, actually. They're easy to learn. If one hasn't had the opportunity of doing so historically, they can pick it up pretty quickly. I think the other skills are actually a little bit more sort of, personnel driven. And that's why you should just kind of make sure that, this ends up being the industry that's going to keep you excited. Because there's so much unknown, you really have to be curious, because you're never going to really know what's the right answer. You're sort of, taking out your crystal ball and making the best judgment possible about what a potential product, solution, service, opportunity can have as legs and capabilities in the future. It's the reason why the autonomy is important is, there are some sports that are team sports, and this is a team sport, but I would say it's like swimming, where you have, your own lane that you're swimming in, but you're on a team together, and the team will, cheer you on and help you and give you like, advice on how to improve a stroke here or there. But for the most part, it's going to be you swimming. And so you really kind of have to, be comfortable with that and be good at that. And then the hunger is just because, it's a competitive world, and you have to figure out how you want to be able to excel. And that doesn't mean that, you completely lose track or sight of who you are, but just really lean into what you can be really in a compelling and special way in the industry, because there's no real right way to do venture. So those are my three things that I talk about probably internally a lot as we're thinking about hiring and adding to the team.
Anyone else want to jump in with? Go ahead.
Those are mine too. The one thing that I would add is communication, written and oral communication. You're just constantly having to explain ideas, having to process information, and then be able to explain either to your partners or to founders or to LPs. And you're constantly selling too. People think that being in venture is folks coming to you and asking you for money, and you just kind of picking who you want to give money to. That's absolutely true. A lot of folks do come and ask for money. Those are typically the folks that, actually I wouldn't say that. There are some of the most compelling deals are the ones where you are the one doing the selling, as opposed, and you are communicating why somebody should work with you and your firm, as opposed to them just kind of waiting on you to make a decision. So, and then internally, I touched on this, but you got to be able to bring people along with you when you're a part of a partnership, when you're coming into an entry-level role, especially, and you don't have that check writing authority at the start. You got to be able to make a compelling case and get people's attention within your own firm, so that you can get your entrepreneurs that you're excited about funded. So communication is the one thing I would add, but intellectual curiosity is definitely at the top of the list. Work ethic and the other things that Fatima mentioned.
So I see Kimmy nodding her head as well. And I'm wondering if you folks would be optimizing for sharpening sales skills and maybe even taking a first job that requires you to be a salesperson.
Yeah, one of my first jobs actually was in sales, and I really sucked at it. It was cold calling. It was brutal. But I look back at that experience because I think it helped me. And then as a business owner, I was constantly selling, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was training a skill that is really, really critical for this business. But the reason I was nodding so hard, I think, with both Sean and Fatima, is the autonomy and the drive is so needed in this job. And I think also, especially for smaller firms and emerging manager funds, that kind of go-getter attitude and being slightly entrepreneurial is very, very important, because there are a lot of things coming at you at once, and being able to take a task and go an extra mile and having confidence that your partner, your employee is going to do that is so, so critical that we can stay ahead.
And banking, as being a junior investment banker, doesn't really give you sales skills, right? And it doesn't give you oral and written communication skills the same way some other jobs would. So is banking not the preferred approach?
I can comment on that. So I think for me, with my banking experience, I think some of the more foundational things I learned were how to present yourself, how to present your ideas, talk to, I was working with a lot of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, public companies. And so just being able to kind of carry and present yourself and share your perspective, I think that's probably one of the things that has been the most transferable in the, kind of the VC job. But a lot of the things like, being able to sell, being the critical thinking skills, right? Like I think in banking, you're sort of told what to do and you just have to kind of get it done. Whereas in venture, one of the things I was going to add to the last question was just having a perspective is one of the most important things that, especially a junior investor, should learn how to develop. I think it's really easy to get lost in, sharing a perspective with folks that may have more experience than you. But I think that the diversity of perspective and leveraging kind of your own knowledge set and the resources and information you have around you to build a perspective that your partners can lean on as you're making investment decisions, I think it's one of the most important things. And so I would say that's something that, stretching that muscle wasn't something that I did in banking that I really needed to do pretty early on in my venture career. And that sort of thing, you kind of can build that while you're in undergrad. There were a number of internships that I did that I can, talk about that helped me in that context. But to Ed's original question, it's definitely a very different job, banking versus at least early stage VC.
And what kind of online sleuthing do you folks do when you're looking at younger, more entry-level applicants? Like what digital breadcrumbs are you consuming about them that they might not be aware of, so they should be careful or they should lean further into doing what on the web?
I can take this one. I would say one of the things that is increasingly important in venture today is like having a digital brand of some kind, like having some sort of, and to Maitree's point about like having a point of view, I love it when junior candidates we're evaluating have shared their views around the world on the internet, right? And it's so easy today to write a blog post or be active on Twitter or whatever method is authentic to who you are, but to come in and have a portfolio of work online that either shares like, hey, this is my unique point of view on this market or trend or space or technology, or this is some of the things that I've done, this is who I am. I think that shows a level of sort of drive and entrepreneurial ability that I think is very important to venture. And to Sean's earlier point, like so much of venture today is a sales job. And so being able to have to sort of demonstrate that you can sell yourself online is, I think, increasingly important. And again, I know that's not necessarily something that everyone is comfortable doing or that makes a lot of sense based on people's personalities, but I've just seen time and time again, so many junior people thrive in venture by building a great brand online. And so I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing on that, just to sort of double down on it. Having a perspective is so important, because realize that venture, it's you can be doing it for 20 years or you can be doing it for 2, and you can probably be equally as good. And that's sort of the beauty about venture in some ways. And you're not just building and thinking about products and solutions for the 60 plus and in the aging tech category, but you're also thinking about it in the Gen Z category and even younger. And so really it's a pretty wide spread of solution sets that one is trying to evaluate. And there will be some that actually, you all will be infinitely better at assessing and understanding than any of us, on the panel right now. And I think the most important thing as investors we have to do is have a pretty, solid sense of why we have a perspective, but be open to changing that based on information and just signals that we're getting from other individuals, and that can very much be anyone on this call. So I think that's like an important thing to just remember.
Yeah, and just a cautionary tale is be constructive and, manage it like a business, because it is public record, and we've seen startups fall and founders fall from what they put out in the public arena. So it's public record. I think there's a lot of benefits. Also, manage what you say.
So when you say be constructive, and I don't want to take too long a detour, so this will be the last thread before we open it for Q&A. There are definitely times where it makes sense to call someone or something out. We've certainly seen that in the venture community recently, where people have said some stuff online that they really shouldn't have, and it makes a lot of sense to step in and voice your opposition to, for instance, the promulgation of racist views, because letting that stuff sit is toxic. So if you saw someone speaking out and maybe it was not, maybe it was being, very negative about something like that, would that be a turnoff?
No, and I think constructive criticism is good. I think there are times where criticism goes on the other side of the table, and I think that it becomes not constructive. I voice my opinion all the time with the things that I see, particularly in the social arena and Black Lives Matter. I've had founders do that, and I step up for them as well. So certainly I think you can be principled and stick to your principles. Just be sure that you're willing to stand by it and be very comfortable that that's part of the personal brand that you're creating. I stand by my views and I voice my opinion. I think everybody should use that. But when I say constructive, meaning constructive in the sense that it moves a dialogue forward in a positive way.
I love that. And thank you for saying that and for standing by those views. Do people want to ask, unless any of the panelists want to respond to that comment or add to that comment, do people have questions? I see questions in the chat, so I know you folks have questions. Oh, is it Tanvi?
Yeah, that's right. Hey everyone, I see some familiar faces on the panel, so it's good to see you guys. I have a question around, how you balance looking out for your own interests versus your community's interests. As a woman, as a person of color, I really do want to bring my community and my people along with me, but I find myself in situations where I feel like I have to take the opportunity for myself or share it with them, and I don't know how to balance those. And I'm noticing I sacrifice my own chance for some things by sharing it or by helping others. So as folks who have been, in the space or passionate about diversity, just would love for you to share either your advice or how you've approached those situations.
I can start maybe, and then others can chime in. There's probably different ways that just feel more natural to everyone on a more personal level. I'll talk about it more specifically on a professional level, how we're doing that. And then hopefully that can give you some kind of, perspectives around ways to structure something that is more tangible. So at our firm, we look pretty different, majority owned by underrepresented minorities. And our focus has been to make sure that, we think about our portfolio and how the impact that we're driving forward can truly have more than just, financial returns and rewards as the biggest, value add back. It can also start to think about societal change and how can we be agents of change in that process. The way we do that is, we think about it as how do we actually assist our portfolios to get the DE&I foundations in place on day one. So how do we give them diverse capital on day one, which kind of happens automatically once you partner with us? How do we give governance on day one, which is diverse? And if it's not one of us who's in the URM category, we actually tap into people in our network who are going to be the right individuals to support the companies. And then really actually the biggest needle that can get moved on that front is on the talent side and giving people the opportunity, because that's actually where the biggest drawback or the hindrance exists. So how do you get communities, how do you get cohorts of people who have historically not had the opportunity of participating in tech and venture and just broadly this asset class, get the ability to do so? And so our focus, a lot of it is spent on making sure that employment is being done in a way that is representative of the countries that, we're present in. And the hiring process is pretty, actively shared in board meetings, and we talk about it, and we have certain goals and KPIs, and we track towards them. And we do that internally, we do that externally. We're very upfront and transparent about that. I think that's the only way to make it, a real effort. Nothing's going to change overnight, but I think things will change in slow strides, and that's the goal that we all have to have in our minds. On a more personal level, I think it's a lot more of education and information than anything else. So think about it as the long game, and people, the more familiar they get with what the potential opportunities could be outside of what they're familiar with in their purview. And if you're doing the right thing by sharing that information with them, just sort of have faith in the process.
The analogy that I think of is, put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. And while you want to lift as you climb, you got to have the strength to be able to lift, and you got to actually get, you want to be in a position where you can be pulling people up too. So, and then just to mirror what Fatima kind of laid out is, I don't think the two really need to be competing priorities, right? She just outlined the way that Mastry has, built into the foundation of what they do, kind of this mission consistency, and that's, that intimately at Concrete Rose. Tomby actually worked with us. She was an MBA associate last summer. So everybody else on the panel, make sure you grab her resume or look at her LinkedIn before we hire her again. But yeah, building it into what you do, so that you're not having to make these trade-offs. It's by accomplishing your mission, by accomplishing your goals, you're also driving the mission forward. That's, I found that many founders, we made that 50% pledge that I referenced around donating our carry, and that was not a strategy to source opportunities and to win deals. It's become one, particularly with underrepresented founders, in that many Black and Latino founders especially feel this responsibility to build their company and also solve racism in tech and venture at the same time. And starting a company is hard enough to begin with, and having that weight is a huge distraction. And so our messaging to those founders is, because the value that you create that goes to Concrete Rose, half of that is going to be going directly back to the community. All you got to do is have your company succeed. Focus your energy there. Do what you do best, and find these ways to kind of build it into what you're doing by partnering with a Concrete Rose or a Mastry or another fund like that. So build it into what you're doing, so you're not making a trade-off. And
we're going to get to Michael in a minute. There was a question that someone asked me to pose anonymously, which I will do. Tanvi, I see that you were also at Cowboy Ventures, which is a great fund, and my wife and I were investors in funds 1 and 2 there, and have great respect for the team. So kudos for that. And to Sean's comment, think about, for whom are you making money? And you can think about that at the micro level as well, like when you hit play on Spotify, for instance. And that is one of the reasons why we started First Close Partners, because we also have a majority of our LP base, our own investors, are underrepresented. And one of my co-founders, I should say, for that is Maitree's partner, Teresa Gao, who also founded Acrew. So the question that was posed anonymously is, how do you think about work-life balance in entry-level VC roles? Obviously, it varies, but it's especially interesting because many times base comp can be relatively low, especially compared to the cost of living in many hotspot VC locations. And I think it's telling that this was a question that someone wanted to pose anonymously.
I'm happy to go. In terms of sort of, thinking about the work-life balance, I'm not going to lie in terms of it's a taxing job, and it's a taxing job because there are so many moving parts to it. There are so many different people you're trying to get a hold of in order to get the information that you need about something that's kind of ambiguous. And so it's, I used to get so annoyed when people used to say VC is a lifestyle, but it actually, I think at this point I have accepted that it is a lifestyle, which is a choice I've made. It doesn't have to be a choice anybody else wants to make or should make. I'm just saying that that's, you know, the annoying reality that I have accepted. And so it's not that your work-life balance doesn't get better. It does get better over time because your filters get better, your approach towards figuring out what the right, you know, business metrics that you're looking for, what sectors you care about, where you want to spend your time, how you want to, like, you know, think about all the things outside of just like the diligence process that help you build your own, you know, swimming track record works is going to be important. And you just kind of have to like figure out where that kind of balance falls for you. But it's not an easy job. It's not for, you know, folks who want to really have a very healthy balance, at least in the beginning. It is a lifestyle. You're choosing to go into that for reasons that you think are hopefully going to give you, you know, a different kind of benefit in your various different variables that you're trying to manage. That's my perspective, but for what it's worth, it does get better.
I'll just
one thing I will.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, just to add a little bit more color, because you know, just given kind of the folks in the room, if you're not as familiar with the day-to-day looks like, you know, I think that like Fatima mentioned, it's VC can be one of those jobs that's 24/7 because it's so driven by your learning and networking, the people you know, and you know, kind of expanding that network so you learn about new opportunities, new businesses, new ideas. And so theoretically, like every time you could be at a party, you can be anywhere and you meet someone, it can be something that is associated to your job. And so I think like that's where it's a really unique, it's a unique role in that everything can be relevant to your job. And so you have to learn how to, you know, kind of create your own boundaries, but also be more effective with your time, like Fatima mentioned, and create kind of those processes for yourself. So as you're evaluating new companies or new founders, like you have kind of those resources for yourself to make your time a little bit more effective. But yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit more color into the specificities of like the role.
And I think the one thing I just wanted to add, which I think is an important thing to call out, is like, you know, many people like early in their careers have like various financial constraints that are play a role in what job that they take. And I think we should acknowledge that exists. And like, I think the reality is like, if your goal is to make a lot of money and particularly to make a lot of money quickly, like, I don't think venture capital is the route you should take if that is your goal. You know, this, as I've alluded to earlier, like this is a job that takes a long time to know if you're good and to make the big bucks. Like it takes literally like decades plus to see that first carry check land or whatever. So like maybe there is this sort of glorified sense that this is one of these jobs that pays a lot. But I think especially at these entry-level jobs, like things like investment banking and private equity and maybe even consulting or even working as a software engineer at a big tech company are probably all going to be more lucrative positions. So if that is a priority for you, I think that's something to think about and take to heart.
And with that, Michael has been waiting patiently for his question. Let's see if we can get to Michael and maybe Ariba.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for speaking with us today. With the emergence of decentralized finance, to what extent do you think it can disrupt traditional finance? And that said, as a student, how can you benefit from this emergence? Your career advice.
I think people recognize that it has the ability to open up pathways that weren't there before. And I think just recently, actually, the leader of VC Include recently spoke about this and said it could even open up more possibilities for fund managers to do things more creatively. I don't know that it will completely disrupt the existing system, but I think it's going to create another pathway that will potentially open doors for people that have typically not been represented. And I say potentially because I think it all depends on how it's utilized and whether and how regulation comes into play, because it's on the horizon. I think it's a question for yourself to decide, like, where do you want to build your capabilities? Clearly, there's a lot happening in this space, and there's going to be a ton of opportunity, not just now, but for years to come. So it could be a way for you to just begin to sharpen your kind of expertise there and potentially create a thesis around. But I would not expect it to completely disrupt the existing systems.
Can we fit in a question from Ariba?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for speaking to us, all of you. My main question is, we brought up how venture capital is a lot of a sales job. So what are the unique resources or ways that you pursue founders or companies and, you know, kind of land those startups?
I'll let someone else take this since I should know this. I could just quickly say that we do both things. And so we cast a wide net through an open application. So we do actually look very heavily at our inbounds. And part of that is actually to remove some of our bias and to get around where I think there's some problems around the warm intro. But we also then take referrals, and the referrals then are going to be coming in sometimes with investors behind them. And so if you look at VC, it's a very, there's a lot of competition. And so knowing your value add and the thing that you bring to the table for the founders is where you build your pitch. And just like any kind of sales, you want to make sure there's a fit on both sides. So is what you're bringing to the table beneficial to this company, either because of the vertical focus you have or the way that you work with them? For us, we roll up our sleeves and work alongside our founders. That's not for everyone. Some people just want to be left alone, but we do that specifically because we're closing access gaps for founders. I'm going to keep my answer brief in case anyone else wants to chime in.
So let's see if we can get Kara's question in, and then I know we have to wrap it. If people have to scoot, they can. Kara?
Thanks. And just super quickly, just curious for those that are, you guys either join new funds or actually started your own funds, just curious of some of the resources that you used inside, maybe outside of VC, to kind of build that momentum moving forward, because I know it's very challenging to go out on your own.
Oh boy, if anyone has that answer, please tell me as well. I don't know if that exists, to be honest, Kara. I actually think one of the like aha moments for me in this process of going through building Mastry, starting to think about all the different, bricks that you have to lay to get the foundations right and all that good stuff has been a learning on the fly process. And there isn't really a lot of great information. In fact, actually, one of the things that came out from this process for us was that we want to put together like a, starting your fund 101 sort of, playbook for people, or just like things that you want to think about and figure out before you get, really deep down the rabbit hole on that. But I think the best answers or the best sources of information that you get are from the people that you know. And so we ended up relying pretty heavily on our network of mentors, advisors, other GPs at other funds who had actually gone through the process of, doing this a couple of times prior. And so that was the most meaningful way of being able to navigate or get any kind of a sense of this slightly more nebulous world. But I don't know if there's like, I think, we rely on our counsel a lot to get the kind of information that we need and the support that we need as well. So I think probably if I had to boil it down to two big cohorts, it's our council that we had, our fund admin that we had, and a real large network of GPs that were very grateful, took the time to sit us down and walk us through their process and their learnings that we could then try and imbibe.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer, and thank you for everybody who asked questions, but a special thank you to each and every one of the panelists and moderator. I think today was really an awesome experience for everybody on the call. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. But, you know, in the very beginning, we heard a couple people mention right place, right time and how they got there. But then we heard a lot about hunger and tenacity. And I think you saw that there's different ways you can put yourself out there and raise the chances that you're in the right place at the right time. And if you're tuning into this panel, then you're already doing the right things and taking that first step. So I encourage you to just put yourself out there and put the hard work in and stay connected with everybody that you've met on this call. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks everyone and good luck.
Good luck.